Nathan Cole had always known the value of land, not in dollars or legal deeds, but in history, in roots that stretched back generations. His 40-acre plot, a stretch of untouched woodland, had been his grandfather's before him, a sanctuary of towering oaks, whispering pines, and a crystal-clear stream that carved its way to the heart of the property. It was more than land, it was legacy. But legacies meant little to men like Richard Lawson. It began subtly. First, a few letters in the mail, offers of interest from Meadow Ridge Development, a subsidiary of the powerful homeowners association that governed the nearby town. The numbers were generous, but Nathan never wavered. His land was not for sale. Then came the knocks at his door, representatives in crisp suits, trying to charm him into a deal. When he refused, their smiles thinned. Their words grew sharper. "Think it over, Mr. Cole," one had said, sliding a business car across his worn porch railing. "Before the decision is made for you." Nathan should have paid closer attention to that warning. One early morning, just as the sun began slicing through trees, he awoke to a sound that sent ice through his veins. Heavy machinery. The deep, mechanical growl of bulldozers and the rhythmic pounding of earth movers. He sprang from his bed, pulling on jeans and boots, and drove toward the commotion, his old truck kicking up dust as he neared the tree line. What he saw stole his breath. The forest was coming down. Majestic oaks, some older than the town itself, lay uprooted, their splinter remains piled carelessly beside freshly poured concrete foundations. Trucks rumbled over once pristine land, flattening nature beneath their wheels. Nathan's land, his land, was being erased before his very eyes. Rage propelled him forward. He stormed onto the construction site, shouting for the workers to stop, but they barely glanced at him before turning back to their tasks. One man, clad in an orange vest and hard hat, finally approached him. "Sir, you can't be here. This is HOA property." Nathan clenched his fists. "The hell it is. This is my land." The worker shrugged. "Not according to the paperwork. If you got a problem, take it up with the board." Nathan didn't wait another second. He drove straight to the Meadow Ridge HOA offices, a pristine white building nestled in the heart of the town's most affluent neighborhood. Inside, beneath the cold glow of recessed lighting, he found Richard Lawson sitting behind a polished mahogany desk, sipping coffee as if he hadn't just orchestrated the theft of a man's birthright. "Nathan," Lawson beamed, setting down his cup. "I was wondering when you dropped by. You stole my land." The words came out low and dangerous, shaking with suppressed fury. Lawson leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. "Nathan, let's not be dramatic. There was a clerical error. The deed transfer was processed weeks ago. Surely you received the notice." Nathan's jaw tightened. He had received no such notice. "This is fraud." "That's a strong accusation." Lawson's smile never wavered. "And an unwise one, considering the circumstances." Nathan felt the walls closing in. He knew how these people operated, wealth connections, a grip on the town's legal system so tight that justice bent in their favor. The Meadow Ridge HOA controlled everything. They dictated lawn heights, mailbox colors, even the direction residents parked their cars. And now, they had claimed something that was never theirs to take. But Nathan wasn't a man to back down. Lawson sighed, as if dealing with a petulant child. "Look, I understand you're upset. Tell you what, why don't we negotiate? I can offer you a generous payout for your inconvenience, a sum much higher than our initial offer. All you have to do is sign a few papers." Nathan's glare could have cut steel. "Not a chance." Lawson's expression darkened. "Then I suppose we'll have to resolve this through other means." Nathan turned on his heel and left without another word. His blood roared in his ears as he stepped into bright afternoon light. The HOA thought they had won. They thought their power, their influence, their fabricated paperwork made them untouchable. They had no idea they had just declared war. And Nathan had every intention of winning. Nathan spent the following weeks in a quiet storm of action. He didn't waste time fuming or drowning in rage. Instead, he focused. He gathered every document he had on the land. Old deeds, tax records, letters from his grandfather when the property was first acquired. Then he hired the best lawyer he could afford, a seasoned property rights attorney, named Ellen Graves. Ellen was sharp as a blade and just as relentless. She combed through records, pulling every legal thread she could find. What they uncovered was a tangled web of fraudulent paperwork, forged signatures, and zoning loopholes manipulated to the HOA's advantage. It was illegal, but proving it in court would take time. Time Nathan didn't have. While Ellen worked the legal front, Nathan turned to the land itself. He knew every inch of it better than anyone. Decades ago, his grandfather had told him stories about the old mining tunnels beneath the property, relics of a long-abandoned gold rush. Some were stable, others barely held together. Their wooden supports rotted by time. Most had been forgotten, except by Nathan. If the HOA wanted to build on stolen land, he'd make sure they regretted it. Under the cover of night, he revisited those tunnels. Armed with flashlight, surveying equipment, and his own knowledge of the terrain, he mapped out where the weakest ground lay, where the HOA's pristine new roads and expensive homes had been placed without a second thought. Then he waited. Cracks began to appear in driveways, tiny at first, then widening. One homeowner complained about their garage shifting slightly off its foundation. The HOA dismissed it as settling issues, but Nathan knew better. One particularly rainy night, the first sinkhole appeared. A front yard caved in, swallowing a brand-new picket fence and a perfectly trimmed hedge. The homeowners were horrified. The HOA called in engineers, but there was no clear solution. Then another hole opened, and another. The land was shifting, reclaiming itself. Nathan watched from a distance, satisfaction curling in his chest. The trap was set, and the best part? They had no idea who had laid it. The HOA scrambled, hiring consultants, blaming construction companies, even accusing homeowners of improper landscaping. But the truth loomed beneath their feet. Nathan's land had never been meant for their polished suburban sprawl. And soon, the consequences would be undeniable, because the biggest collapse was yet to come. Nathan's patience was running thin, but he knew better than to act rashly. The HOA had power, money, and lawyers on their side. But what they didn't have was the resilience and the sheer stubbornness of a man fighting for something that was his by right. The sinkholes were just the beginning. Now it was time to bring the fight directly to their doorstep. The first step was making sure the town knew what was happening. Nathan had no illusions about the HOA's influence. The local newspapers rarely published anything that painted them in a bad light, and the town officials were either under their thumb or too afraid to challenge them. So he turned to the one platform they couldn't control, the internet. With Ellen's help, Nathan compiled every piece of evidence they had: deeds, forged documents, proof of fraudulent zoning approvals, and video footage of the land collapsing under the weight of the newly built homes. They uploaded it all online, attaching it to a scathing expose about the HOA's corruption. Within hours, it started gaining traction. By morning, it had gone viral. People were furious. Residents who had once turned a blind eye to the HOA's overreach suddenly had something real to fear. The realization that their own homes could be at risk turned complacency into outrage. More homeowners came forward, sharing their own horror stories. Unfair fines, forced evictions, sudden rule changes designed to push people out of their properties. What had once been whispers of discontent became a roar of public anger. The HOA board scrambled to do damage control, but the truth had already spread too far. News stations picked up the story, interviewing residents who had lost thousands of dollars in unfair penalties. One particularly damning interview featured an elderly couple who had been forced to sell their home after the HOA fined them into bankruptcy over a non-compliant garden fence. Nathan watched as the foundation of their control started to crack, just like the very land beneath their feet. But he wasn't done yet. The HOA's board held an emergency meeting, trying to contain the damage. Nathan, uninvited but undeterred, walked straight into their offices as the meeting was underway. Richard Lawson's face twisted in barely contained rage as Nathan entered. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here, Cole." Nathan didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply placed a thick manila folder on the table. "I have evidence of fraud, corruption, and illegal land seizure. You can either return what's mine or we take this to court." Lawson sneered. "You think you've won? Our lawyers will bury you. This entire town is built on HOA land. No judge is going to rule against us. Ellen, who had accompanied Nathan, leaned forward with an easy confidence. Funny thing about fraud, Lawson, it doesn't just void your contracts. It opens you up to criminal charges. Lawson's smirk faltered. Forgery of legal documents, falsifying zoning permits, coercion. It's all right here. She tapped the folder. You might be able to buy your way out of civil court, but good luck bribing a federal judge. The room fell into uneasy silence. Some of the other board members exchanged nervous glances. They were starting to realize that Lawson's bravado wasn't going to save them. Then came the final blow. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small recording device. He pressed play. Lawson's own voice filled the room. The deed transfer was processed weeks ago. Surely you received a notice. That's a strong accusation, and an unwise one, considering the circumstances. Then I suppose we'll have to resolve this through other means. It was all there. The veiled threats. The implication that Nathan had no choice. The proof that the HOA had knowingly stolen his land. One of the board members, a woman with tight lips and a pinched expression, stood abruptly. I'm not going down for this. I vote we settle. Another member followed suit. Then another. Lawson's face turned red, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. You're all cowards. We still have options. Nathan stood. No, you don't. You have two choices. Return the land, compensate the homeowners you've cheated, and dissolve the HOA, or I take this all the way. And trust me, I won't stop until every single one of you is held accountable. The board muttered amongst themselves. The fear in their eyes told Nathan everything he needed to know. They had lost. It took weeks to finalize, but in the end, Nathan got everything he had fought for. His land was returned. The fraudulent developments halted, and the Meadow Ridge HOA dissolved under the weight of lawsuits and criminal investigations. Lawson resigned in disgrace, facing charges that would likely see him in prison before the year was out. But the best part? The town had changed. The people, once too afraid to speak out, had found their voice. Homeowners took back their power, refusing to let another HOA rise in Meadow Ridge's place. The era of unchecked control was over. As Nathan stood on his land, watching the sun rise over the trees that had survived the HOA's greed, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Victory. And this time it was truly his. Nathan's victory had sent shockwaves through Meadow Ridge. The once feared HOA, a monolithic force that dictated the town's every aesthetic and financial detail, had crumbled under its own corruption. But just because the war had been won didn't mean the battlefield was clear. There was still damage to be repaired, debts to be settled, and consequences to be faced. With the HOA officially dissolved, the remaining board members scurried to salvage what they could of their personal reputations. Some fled town before formal charges could be pressed. Others, like Lawson, stubbornly tried to fight back, clinging to whatever legal loopholes they thought could protect them. But Ellen was relentless, ensuring that every shady deal and fraudulent contract came to light. Lawsuits flooded in from homeowners who had been victimized by unlawful fines, land grabs, and coercive tactics. Some had lost their life savings trying to comply with the HOA's oppressive rules. Now, they were demanding restitution. Nathan watched as property values fluctuated and new town hall meetings were scheduled. Without the HOA to enforce its draconian standards, many homeowners were left with uncertainty about the future of their community. Some feared that without restrictions, the neighborhood would fall into chaos. Lawns overgrown, houses painted garish colors, and property disputes breaking out unchecked. But Nathan knew better. People weren't incapable of self-governance. They had been conditioned to think they needed the HOA to maintain order. But the truth was, most of them simply wanted to live their lives in peace. They didn't need a bureaucratic overlord to tell them how to exist. Still, not everyone saw it that way. One evening, as Nathan sat on his porch, enjoying the crisp autumn air, a familiar figure walked up his gravel driveway. It was Carter Mendez, a former HOA enforcer who had once taken great pleasure in issuing citations for the most trivial infractions. Nathan tensed, ready for a confrontation, but Carter raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to fight," Carter said. I wanted to talk." Ethan eyed him warily but nodded for him to sit. Carter sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. I never thought I'd say this, but you were right. The HOA was corrupt. I was too blind or too afraid to see it. I thought we were maintaining order, keeping the community desirable. But all we did was make people miserable. And now I'm out of a job, and I don't know what comes next. Nathan studied him for a long moment before replying. You don't need an HOA badge to do something good for this town, Carter. The people here need help rebuilding. They need to feel secure in their own homes again. You want to make things right? Help them. Carter looked surprised but thoughtful. Yeah, maybe I will. It was a small step toward reconciliation, but it was a step nonetheless. Meanwhile, Richard Lawson was fighting tooth and nail to avoid prosecution. He had money stashed away, hidden accounts, and enough influence to stall the legal process. But he was losing allies fast. The once loyal board members who had voted alongside him were now testifying against him in exchange for plea deals. One night, Ellen called Nathan with an update. Lawson scrambling. He's trying to settle out of court with some of the biggest plaintiffs, but he won't be able to buy his way out of all of this. Nathan leaned back in his chair, a small smirk playing on his lips. Good. Let him squirm. Ellen chuckled. Oh, he's squirming all right. But we're not done yet. There's still the matter of your land. We need to make sure it's properly reinstated in your name, without any lingering legal loopholes. I trust you to handle that, Nathan said. You've done more for me than I ever could have asked. Ellen was silent for a moment before replying. You stood your ground when most people would have given up. That's why we won. Nathan didn't argue. He simply watched the stars flicker in the dark sky, knowing that for the first time in a long time, peace was within reach. As weeks passed, Meadow Ridge began to reshape itself. Without the HOA's interference, neighbors started talking to each other again, not as rule enforcers and rule breakers, but as equals. Community meetings replaced dictatorial board gatherings. Decisions about neighborhood improvements were made by consensus, not by decree. Some houses did get painted in bold, unconventional colors. A few lawns became wild gardens. But no one cared. If anything, the town had never looked more alive. Nathan walked to the neighborhood one afternoon, seeing kids playing in yards that had once been deemed unsightly. He saw elderly couples sitting on porches, without fear being fined for the wrong type of patio furniture. He saw people helping each other instead of reporting each other. And he knew he had done the right thing. Yet, as much as Nathan had won, he wasn't the type to get complacent. He still kept an eye on things. There were always those who would try to seize power in the vacuum the HOA had left behind. But this time, the people of Meadow Ridge weren't so easy to control. By the end of it all, Nathan had not only reclaimed his land, he had reclaimed the town, and that, he realized, was the sweetest victory of all. The collapse of the Meadow Ridge HOA had sent shockwaves far beyond the town itself. News stations continued to cover the fallout, and legal analysts debated how a small-town homeowner had managed to dismantle one of the most powerful HOAs in the state. To many, Nathan had become something of a folk hero, a symbol of resistance against bureaucratic overreach. But despite the victory, he knew the battle wasn't over. Nathan's land was back in his name, but the damage done by the HOA's reckless development was undeniable. The once pristine woodland had been scarred by half-built homes, hastily abandoned when the lawsuits hit. The ground, already unstable from the rushed construction, was littered with debris, concrete foundations cracking under their own weight, unfinished houses tilting like drunken skeletons in the twilight. Standing at the edge of his land, Nathan took a deep breath. He had won, but now came the hard part, rebuilding. Nathan wasn't alone. The community, once fractured by fear and control, had found its voice again. Volunteers, some of whom had been former victims of the HOA's greed, gathered to help clear the wreckage. Carter Mendez, the former HOA enforcer turned unlikely ally, had taken it upon himself to organize the efforts, proving that even those who had once enforced the system could change. It's going to take time, Carter said, wiping sweat from his brow as he surveyed the land. But we'll make it right. Nathan nodded. We will. Ellen arrived with more news. The town council is stepping in. They're offering grants to help restore the damaged areas. Turns out the HOA was operating outside a lot more legal boundaries than we thought. The state is getting involved, too. There's talk about new legislation to prevent this kind of land seizure from happening again. Nathan exhaled, a mix of relief and exhaustion settling in his bones. Good. Let them learn from this. But there was still one loose end. Richard Lawson. The former HOA president had gone into hiding as the lawsuits piled up, but there was no running from justice. The federal charges against him, including fraud, embezzlement, and coercion, ensured that he wouldn't be walking away from this unscathed. Nathan kept close watch on the developments, knowing that the final nail in the coffin would be Lawson's sentencing. It came 6 months later. Nathan, Ellen, and several former HOA victims sat in the courtroom as the judge delivered the verdict. Lawson, once a man who ruled over Meadow Ridge with an iron fist, now sat in a cheap suit, his face pale and drawn. The jury found him guilty on multiple counts. The sentence was harsh. 15 years in federal prison, with hefty restitution payments to be made to the homeowners he had wronged. As the gavel struck, Lawson turned his eyes to Nathan. There was no arrogance left, no smug confidence. Only the quiet, dawning realization that he had lost everything. Nathan met his gaze without a hint of sympathy. Justice had been served. With the legal battles behind them, Meadow Ridge entered a new era. The absence of the HOA meant that homeowners could finally reclaim their autonomy, but it also meant they had to take responsibility for their own community. Nathan, once a solitary man content with his land, found himself becoming a leader in ways he never expected. Town meetings became a place of collaboration instead of conflict. Neighbors who had once been at odds over petty infractions now worked together to create a shared vision for the town's future. Instead of HOA-enforced regulations, community-led initiatives took their place. Beautification projects, neighborhood watches, and even a local garden collective. Ellen, ever the strategist, helped guide the town through its transition. You proved something, Nathan, that people don't need to be controlled to create something good. They just need the freedom to choose. He smirked. Never thought I'd end up a symbol of revolution. She laughed. Life's funny that way. Years passed, and Meadow Ridge thrived. The scars left by the HOA's reign faded, replaced by new growth, both in the land and in the people who called it home. Nathan's property, once a battleground, became a sanctuary once more. The stream ran clear, the trees stood tall, and the land, his land, remained untouched by greed. As he stood on his porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had fought. He had won, and most importantly, he had reclaimed what was his, for good.